The iron shackles bit into Penelope Davis's wrists as the relentless Arizona sun beat down on her dust-caked face, her legs barely keeping pace with the deputy's hurried stride toward the Fort Yuma jailhouse. "I'm innocent," she insisted for what felt like the 100th time, her voice hoarse from the miles they'd traveled. "Someone's trying to frame me for this robbery." Deputy Simmons merely tightened his grip on her arm, his weathered face expressionless beneath the shadow of his hat. "Save it for the judge, Miss Davis. Half the territory's looking for the woman who robbed the Prescott Bank, and your description matches perfectly." Fort Yuma, California, 1874, was a town that straddled the line between civilization and lawlessness, much like the Colorado River that divided California from Arizona territory nearby. At 23, Penelope had never imagined she'd find herself being dragged through its dusty streets, the curious and judgmental gazes of townspeople burning holes in her back. "I was in Tucson that day," she protested, stumbling over a rut in the road. "I've never even been to Prescott." "That ain't what our witnesses say," Simmons replied, yanking her forward as the imposing wooden jailhouse came into view. "They described a woman with your red hair and green eyes, about your height, wearing a dress just like the one found in your satchel." Tears stung Penelope's eyes as the reality of her situation sank in. She'd only come west 3 months ago after her parents' death in Philadelphia, hoping to start anew with her aunt in San Francisco. But her stagecoach had been attacked by bandits 2 weeks ago, and she'd been stranded in this unforgiving territory ever since, taking odd jobs to earn enough for the remainder of her journey. Now she was being accused of a crime she didn't commit, with seemingly irrefutable evidence against her. The trial was set for 2 days hence, and the penalty for armed bank robbery could be hanging. The thought sent a chill down her spine despite the scorching heat. "Please," she tried one last time as they reached the jailhouse steps. "There's been a mistake." But Deputy Simmons merely pushed her through the door, where Sheriff Thomas Baldwin waited, his gray mustache twitching with disapproval. "Got her, Sheriff," Simmons announced, pushing Penelope forward. "Good work, Deputy," the sheriff replied, eyeing Penelope with suspicion. "Miss Davis, you'll be staying with us until Judge Wilson arrives. The evidence against you is substantial." "What evidence?" Penelope demanded, finding her courage. "I want to know exactly what I'm accused of," Sheriff Baldwin sighed, gesturing for Simmons to remove her shackles. 3 witnesses place you at the Prescott Bank last Tuesday. $500 was stolen at gunpoint, and a dress matching the description of what the robber wore was found in your possession. Your hair and eye color match, and you're new to these parts with no one to vouch for your character. "I was working at Mrs. Miller's boarding house in Tucson that day," Penelope insisted. "She can vouch for me. We've already sent a telegram," Simmons said flatly. "Mrs. Miller says you left her employ 3 days prior to the robbery." Penelope's heart sank. It was true she'd left Mrs. Miller's, but only because the old woman's son had made unwelcome advances. She'd found work at a different establishment in Tucson, but it had been under the table, with no one of standing to confirm her whereabouts. "Deputy, take her to the cell," Sheriff Baldwin ordered, turning away. As Simmons led her toward the back of the building, Penelope caught a glimpse of a tall figure leaning against the wall outside the sheriff's office. A man in dusty trail clothes, his face partially hidden by a worn leather hat, seemed to be studying her intently. The steel door clanged shut behind her, and Penelope sank onto the thin mattress of the cell's single cot, finally allowing the tears to fall. How had everything gone so wrong? She drew her knees up to her chest, wondering if anyone would even care enough to help her. Outside, the sheriff approached the tall stranger who still lingered by the office door. Something I can help you with, mister. The man straightened, revealing piercing blue eyes in a sun-bronzed face. Name's Jackson Quinn, he said, his voice carrying the slight drawl of Texas. I heard you just brought in a suspect for the Prescott Bank robbery. Sheriff Baldwin's eyes narrowed. What's your interest in the matter? Professional curiosity, Jackson replied smoothly, adjusting his hat. I track people for a living. Sometimes they're criminals, sometimes they're missing persons. You a bounty hunter, among other things. I prefer recovery specialist. A ghost of a smile played across Jackson's lips. I've been following a particular case that might connect to your bank robbery. Baldwin studied the man for a long moment before nodding toward his office. Come on in, then. Could use another set of eyes on this mess. Inside the Spartan office, Jackson Quinn settled into a chair across from the sheriff's desk, declining the offered whiskey with a shake of his head. So what's your interest in Miss Davis? Baldwin asked, pouring himself a generous measure. Not in her specifically, Jackson clarified. I've been tracking a woman named Alina Blackwell for the past month. She's wanted for a string of robberies across 3 territories. Always the same method. She finds a young woman with similar features, studies her habits, then commits the crime wearing clothes that match her unwitting double style. Baldwin's eyebrows rose. And you think this Blackwell woman might be behind the Prescott job? It fits her pattern, Jackson said, leaning forward. The victim is usually a newcomer to the area, someone without strong connections or alibis. Blackwell robs the bank, plants evidence implicating her double, then disappears while an innocent woman takes the blame. The sheriff frowned. That's a serious claim, Quinn. What makes you think Miss Davis isn't your Blackwell using a false name? Because I spotted Alina Blackwell in Yuma yesterday, Jackson replied. When I heard about the arrest today, I put it together. She's here to watch another innocent woman hang for her crimes. Baldwin's hand tightened around his glass. That's circumstantial at best. I can't release a prisoner based on your hunches. I'm not asking for her release, Jackson said. Just time to gather evidence before the judge arrives. If I'm right, the real criminal is still in town, probably planning her next robbery while Miss Davis sits in your jail. After a long pause, Baldwin nodded reluctantly. You've got until Judge Wilson arrives day after tomorrow, but if you're wasting my time, Quinn, you'll regret it. Fair enough, Jackson agreed, standing. Mind if I speak with your prisoner? Minutes later, Penelope looked up at the sound of footsteps approaching her cell, hastily wiping away tears. The tall stranger from earlier appeared, accompanied by Deputy Simmons. Miss Davis, this is Mr. Quinn, the deputy said gruffly. He's got some questions for you. Jackson nodded to the deputy. I'll call if I need anything. Once Simmons retreated, Jackson pulled up a stool and sat facing the cell. Miss Davis, I believe you might be the victim of a calculated frame-up, he said without preamble. Hope flared in Penelope's chest, but wariness quickly tempered it. Who are you? Jackson Quinn. I track people who don't want to be found, he explained. Right now, I'm tracking someone I believe framed you for that bank robbery. Penelope moved closer to the bars. You believe I'm innocent? His blue eyes met hers directly. I think it's possible. Tell me about your arrival in the territory and everything that's happened since. For the next hour, Penelope recounted her journey west after her parents' deaths from influenza, the stagecoach robbery that had left her stranded, her brief employment with Mrs. Miller, and her subsequent struggles to continue her journey to San Francisco. Jackson listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When she finished, he nodded slowly. The dress they found in your possession, where did you get it? Penelope frowned. I bought it in Tucson from a seamstress near the hotel where I was staying after I left Mrs. Miller's. I needed something respectable for job interviews, and it was still wrapped when they found it. Yes, I hadn't even worn it yet, she confirmed. How did you know? Jackson's expression hardened. Because that's how Alina Blackwell operates. She finds a woman who resembles her, buys identical clothing, commits her crimes, then plants the evidence. Who is Alina Blackwell? Penelope asked, gripping the bars. A very clever thief who's left a trail of innocent women in her wake, Jackson explained. 3 are serving prison sentences for crimes she committed. 1 was hanged in Santa Fe last year. A chill ran through Penelope. And you think she framed me? I know she did, Jackson said firmly. And she's still in Fort Yuma. I spotted her yesterday. Then we can catch her, prove my innocence, Penelope exclaimed. That's the plan, he agreed. But we need to move carefully. Blackwell is extremely cautious. It's how she's evaded capture for so long. Why are you helping me? Penelope asked suddenly. What's your stake in this? A shadow crossed Jackson's face. The woman who hanged in Santa Fe was engaged to my cousin. He was convinced of her innocence, but no one would listen. By the time I started investigating, it was too late for her. Penelope's eyes softened with understanding. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, Jackson replied, standing. Just be ready. I'll need your help to catch Blackwell, even from in here. Anything, Penelope promised. I don't intend to hang for another woman's crimes. As Jackson left the jailhouse, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon. Fort Yuma was starting to come alive as the day's heat subsided, with more people filling the streets and saloons opening their doors for the evening business. He made his way toward the Colorado Hotel, the most respectable establishment in town, and the most likely place for someone like Alina Blackwell to stay. The thief had expensive tastes and typically used her ill-gotten gains to maintain appearances as a wealthy widow or spinster. Inside the hotel's lobby, Jackson approached the front desk with a charming smile. Good evening. I was supposed to meet a business associate here, a Mrs. Blackwell. Has she checked in yet? The clerk, a young man with slicked back hair, consulted his register. No Mrs. Blackwell, sir. We do have a Miss Westfield who arrived 3 days ago. Perhaps that's who you're looking for. Jackson maintained his casual demeanor. Perhaps. What does Miss Westfield look like? My associate sometimes uses different names for privacy. Blonde lady, very refined, the clerk offered. Staying in our finest suite, said she's considering property investments in the area. That sounds like her, Jackson nodded. Would you happen to know if she's in at the moment? The clerk glanced toward the hotel restaurant. She typically dines at 7. It's just past 6 now, so she should be preparing for dinner. Much obliged, Jackson replied, slipping a coin across the counter. He positioned himself in the hotel lobby, partially hidden behind a large potted palm, and waited. At precisely 7 o'clock, a striking blonde woman in an elegant blue dress descended the stairs. Though he'd only seen her from a distance before, Jackson was certain this was Alina Blackwell. She carried herself with the confident poise of someone accustomed to being admired, her practiced smile revealing nothing of her true nature. Jackson watched as she dined alone, nursing a single glass of wine throughout her meal. She spoke cordially with the waiter but engaged with no one else. After dinner, instead of returning to her room, she exited the hotel and walked purposefully down the main street. Keeping a careful distance, Jackson followed her to a small dress shop that was just closing for the evening. The proprietress, clearly recognizing her, welcomed her inside despite the hour. 15 minutes later, Blackwell emerged with a small package wrapped in brown paper. Next, she visited the telegraph office, which remained open later than most businesses due to the constant flow of messages. Again, Jackson waited outside, wondering what communications the thief might be sending or receiving. When she finally returned to the hotel, Jackson made his way back to the jail. It was well after 9, but light still burned in the sheriff's office window. "Any luck?" Baldwin asked as Jackson entered. "She's here all right," Jackson confirmed. "Going by the name Miss Westfield, staying at the Colorado Hotel and making preparations for something." The sheriff frowned. "Preparations for what, my guess?" "Another robbery before she leaves town," Jackson said. "She usually commits one final crime before disappearing, leaving her unfortunate double to take the blame for all of it." "So what's your plan?" Jackson removed his hat, running a hand through his sandy hair. "I need to catch her in the act, or find concrete evidence linking her to the Prescott robbery. Until then, it's just my word against the witnesses who identified Miss Davis." "Those witnesses seemed mighty certain," Baldwin pointed out. "They saw a woman who looked like Penelope Davis," Jackson countered. "That's Blackwell's entire strategy. From a distance or in poor light, they could easily be mistaken for each other." Baldwin sighed heavily. "Judge Wilson won't care about your theories, Quinn. He's a hanging judge, especially when it comes to bank robbers." "Then I'll have to work fast," Jackson replied grimly. "Can I see Miss Davis again?" The sheriff nodded to Deputy Simmons, who led Jackson back to the cells. Penelope was sitting on her cot, looking pale but composed. She stood when she saw Jackson approaching. "Did you find her?" she asked immediately. "Yes, she's staying at the Colorado Hotel under the name Miss Westfield," Jackson replied. "She's planning something, but I'm not sure what yet." "How can I help from in here?" Penelope asked. Jackson glanced at Simmons, who took the hint and stepped back out of earshot. "I need to know everything about your movements since arriving in the territory. Every place you stayed, every person you spoke with. Blackwell would have been watching you, studying you. Someone might have noticed her." Penelope closed her eyes, thinking carefully. "After the stagecoach robbery, I stayed at Miller's boarding house in Tucson for almost 2 weeks. Then I took a room at Donovan's Hotel for 3 nights. I applied for work at the Silver Dollar Saloon, the territorial office, and Hampton's Mercantile." "Anyone take special interest in you, ask unusual questions?" She hesitated. "There was a woman at Donovan's. She commented on my hair one morning at breakfast, said she'd never seen such a unique shade of red. I thought it was just a compliment at the time." "What did she look like?" Jackson pressed. "Blonde, well-dressed. I assumed she was wealthy the way the hotel staff treated her," Penelope recalled. "She introduced herself as Margaret, I think. Margaret Wilson." Jackson's eyes narrowed. "Wilson is the name of the judge coming to try your case." Penelope's face paled. "You don't think?" "I think Alina Blackwell leaves nothing to chance," Jackson replied grimly. "She may have been laying groundwork to ensure your conviction." "What can we do?" "I'm going to follow her tomorrow, see what she's planning," Jackson said. "And I'll wire some contacts who might have information about her previous targets. There has to be a pattern we can use." As he turned to leave, Penelope called after him softly. "Mr. Quinn, thank you for believing me. No one else has." Something in her voice made him turn back. In the dim lamplight, with her copper hair falling around her shoulders and her green eyes bright with unshed tears, she looked both vulnerable and determined. It struck Jackson then that even if he hadn't been tracking Blackwell, he might have been compelled to help this woman anyway. "Try to get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow will be a busy day." Dawn broke over Fort Yuma, painting the adobe buildings in golden light as Jackson made his way to the telegraph office the moment it opened. He sent wires to contacts in Santa Fe, Denver, and San Francisco, requesting any information on Alina Blackwell's recent activities. While waiting for replies, he positioned himself near the Colorado Hotel, watching as Miss Westfield emerged in a smart traveling outfit. She spent the morning visiting various businesses in town, including the First Bank of Yuma, where she spent nearly an hour with the manager. Jackson observed from across the street, noting how she charmed the older man, laughing at his jokes and touching his arm occasionally. When she left the bank, she walked directly to the courthouse, where preparations were being made for Judge Wilson's arrival the following day. She spoke briefly with a court clerk, then continued to the sheriff's office. Jackson ducked into a nearby alley, watching as Blackwell entered the jailhouse. 20 minutes later, she emerged, looking pleased with herself. Once she was safely out of sight, Jackson approached the sheriff's office. "Sheriff, did a Miss Westfield just visit?" he asked Baldwin. The sheriff nodded. "Said she was the victim of a pickpocket in Prescott last month. Wanted to know if we'd caught any female thieves lately." "And you told her about Penelope Davis," Jackson concluded. "Just that we had a suspect in custody," Baldwin confirmed. "She seemed mighty interested, asked when the trial would be." "She's setting the stage," Jackson muttered, "making sure everyone connects Miss Davis to the robbery." The telegraph office had received replies to Jackson's inquiries by mid-afternoon. The messages confirmed his suspicions. Alina Blackwell had been sighted in Denver just 3 weeks ago, where a young red-headed woman had been arrested for jewel theft. Similar cases had occurred in Cheyenne, Santa Fe, and Sacramento over the past year. Armed with this information, Jackson returned to the jail to update Penelope. "She visited the sheriff today," he told her, asking about female thieves. Penelope's expression tightened. "She wants to make sure I'm convicted." "Yes, but she's also getting careless," Jackson pointed out. "The more she shows her face around town, the more people can connect her to the case later. And I've received confirmation of her pattern in other cities." "Is it enough to convince the judge?" Penelope asked hopefully. Jackson hesitated. "Not yet, but I have a plan to catch her red-handed." "There's just one problem." "What?" "It puts you at risk," he admitted, "and it requires the sheriff's cooperation." Penelope straightened her shoulders. "Tell me." "Blackwell always commits one final robbery before leaving town," Jackson explained. "I believe she's planning to rob the First Bank of Yuma tomorrow, while everyone's attention is focused on your trial. But if word were to leak that your trial had been delayed, she might adjust her plans," Penelope finished, catching on quickly. "Exactly. And if she believed you might be released due to lack of evidence, she'd need to act faster," Penelope nodded. "She'd need to ensure I was still blamed for her crimes." Jackson smiled slightly, impressed by her quick understanding. "She'd need to plant more evidence, make the case against you stronger." "So you want to use me as bait," Penelope concluded. "Let her think she has an opportunity to frame me more thoroughly." "It's dangerous," Jackson acknowledged. "But if we catch her planting evidence in your belongings, or better yet, attempting to rob the bank while disguised as you, we prove my innocence and her guilt in one stroke," Penelope finished. "I'll do it." Sheriff Baldwin took more convincing. He listened to Jackson's plan with increasing skepticism, only reluctantly agreeing when Jackson presented the telegrams confirming Blackwell's pattern in other cities. "If you're wrong about this, Quinn, we could lose both our bank's money and our prisoner," the sheriff warned. "And if I'm right, you'll have captured one of the most wanted thieves in the Western Territories," Jackson countered. "Think of what that would do for your reputation." By evening, the plan was set. Word would be accidentally leaked by Deputy Simmons at the saloon that Judge Wilson's arrival had been delayed by at least 2 days, and that the evidence against Penelope Davis was being questioned. Meanwhile, Penelope's personal belongings would be moved to an unlocked storage room adjacent to the cells, accessible but still within the jailhouse. "Get some rest," Jackson told Penelope before leaving. "Tomorrow could be dangerous." "Mr. Quinn," she called as he turned to go. "Why are you risking so much for me? You barely know me." Jackson paused, considering the question. "I believe in justice," he finally said, "and I've seen too many innocent people suffer while the guilty walk free." "There's more to it than that," Penelope pressed gently. A half smile played across his lips. "Perhaps there is," he conceded. "Get some sleep, Miss Davis. Tomorrow we catch a thief." Morning brought news that Deputy Simmons' staged conversation at the saloon had worked perfectly. The bartender confirmed that a blonde woman had been particularly interested in the gossip about Penelope's case possibly being dismissed. Jackson spent the early hours watching the Colorado hotel, noting when Alina Blackwell emerged wearing a practical riding outfit. She visited the livery stable, presumably arranging for a horse, then made a brief stop at the dress shop again. By mid-morning, everything was in place. Penelope had been moved to a more secure cell at the back of the jailhouse, while her belongings were placed in the unlocked storage room as planned. Sheriff Baldwin stationed Deputy Simmons on the roof of the building across from the bank, while he himself pretended to leave town on an errand, only to double back and position himself near the jailhouse. Jackson divided his time between watching the bank and the jail, knowing Blackwell would need to act soon if she believed Penelope might be released. The hours ticked by slowly, the tension building as the town went about its normal business, unaware of the trap being set. Just after the lunch hour, when many businesses closed briefly for the midday meal, Jackson spotted movement near the back of the jailhouse. A figure in dark clothing slipped through the rear entrance, which had been deliberately left unguarded. He gave the signal to Sheriff Baldwin, who began making his way toward the jail, then continued watching for any accomplice Blackwell might have posted as lookout. Seeing none, Jackson approached the jailhouse from the side, drawing his revolver as he reached the back door. Inside, he moved silently through the corridor, hearing faint rustling sounds from the storage room. Peering around the corner, he saw Alina Blackwell, now dressed in men's clothing with her blonde hair tucked up under a hat, carefully placing something in Penelope's satchel. "That's far enough, Miss Blackwell," Jackson announced, stepping into view with his revolver trained on her. She whirled around, her hand darting toward her waistband, but Jackson's warning shot into the ceiling made her freeze. "I wouldn't," he advised calmly. "Sheriff Baldwin is right outside, and we know exactly who you are and what you've done." For a moment, Blackwell's refined facade cracked, revealing the calculating criminal beneath. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice colder than he'd expected. "I'm just returning something this woman stole from me." "Is that why you're dressed as a man?" Jackson asked. "Or were you planning to rob the bank dressed like that, then change back to Miss Westfield and slip out of town while Penelope Davis hanged for your crimes?" Uncertainty flickered in Blackwell's eyes. "Who are you?" "Someone who's been tracking you since Santa Fe," he replied. "You're running out of innocent women to frame, Alina." Sheriff Baldwin appeared in the doorway behind Jackson, his shotgun at the ready. "Hands where I can see them, madam." Blackwell's shoulders slumped in apparent defeat, but as Baldwin moved to handcuff her, she suddenly kicked backward, catching the sheriff in the knee. He stumbled and she lunged for the door. Jackson intercepted her, grabbing her arm. She fought with surprising strength, landing a solid punch to his jaw before he managed to pin her against the wall. "It's over," he told her firmly as Baldwin recovered and secured the handcuffs around her wrists. "We have witnesses who can identify you in Tucson and Prescott, telegrams confirming your pattern across 3 territories, and now we've caught you planting evidence." As Baldwin led Blackwell away, Jackson examined what she'd been trying to plant in Penelope's belongings. It was a small leather pouch containing what appeared to be a bank teller's withdrawal slips from the Prescott Bank, along with a folded handkerchief bearing the initials PD. Presumably planted at the scene of the robbery and recovered by Blackwell. Clever, he murmured, but not clever enough. He found Penelope in the back cell, anxiously awaiting news. "We caught her," he announced, feeling a surge of satisfaction at the relief that washed over her face. "She was planting additional evidence in your belongings." "So it's over?" Penelope asked, hardly daring to believe it. "Almost," Jackson replied. "We need to get statements from the bank staff in Prescott, confirm it was Blackwell they saw and not you. But Sheriff Baldwin is already convinced. He's sending telegrams to notify Judge Wilson of the developments." Tears of relief filled Penelope's eyes. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need for thanks," Jackson said, suddenly finding himself affected by her emotion. "I was just doing my job." "Was it just your job?" she asked softly, stepping closer to the bars. "You could have simply captured her and collected whatever bounty there might be. You didn't have to prove my innocence." Jackson met her gaze, unable to deny the connection he'd felt growing between them over these intense days. "No," he admitted. "It wasn't just the job." Before he could say more, Sheriff Baldwin appeared. "Miss Davis, I'm releasing you into Mr. Quinn's custody while we sort this mess out. Judge Wilson will still want to speak with you when he arrives tomorrow, but as a witness, not a defendant." As Penelope's cell was unlocked, she stepped out uncertainly, as if not quite believing her ordeal was ending. "What happens to Alina Blackwell now?" "She'll face trial for multiple robberies," Baldwin explained, handing Penelope her belongings. "And for framing innocent women. If half of what Quinn suspects is true, she'll never see freedom again." Outside the jailhouse, the late afternoon sun bathed Fort Yuma in golden light. Penelope took a deep breath of freedom, looking both relieved and disoriented. "Where will you go now?" Jackson asked as they walked down the main street. "I still hope to reach San Francisco eventually," she replied. "My aunt is expecting me, though she probably believes I've abandoned the journey by now." Jackson nodded, feeling an unexpected reluctance at the thought of her leaving. "I could escort you there," he offered. "The roads aren't safe for a woman traveling alone." Penelope studied him thoughtfully. "Why would you do that? Surely you have other recoveries to make." "None as important," he said simply. A slight blush colored her cheeks. "Mr. Quinn, Jackson," he corrected. "Jackson," she amended with a small smile. "I would welcome your company, but I can't ask you to abandon your livelihood for me." "You're not asking," he pointed out. "I'm offering." They had reached the Colorado Hotel, where arrangements had been made for Penelope to stay until Judge Wilson's arrival. The former occupant of the finest suite was now residing in the jail's most secure cell. "Perhaps we should discuss it over dinner," Penelope suggested. "I find I'm famished after days of jail food." "I'd be honored," Jackson replied, offering his arm. Over dinner in the hotel restaurant, they spoke less of their recent ordeal and more of their lives before Fort Yuma. Jackson described growing up on a small ranch in Texas, losing his parents to a fever when he was 16, and making his way as a tracker and bounty hunter. Penelope shared stories of her childhood in Philadelphia, her father's work as a professor, and her mother's love of literature. "They would have hated the idea of me coming west alone," she admitted. "But after they died, staying in Philadelphia felt impossible. Every street, every shop reminded me of them." "And your aunt in San Francisco?" Jackson asked. "My mother's sister." "She's been writing to me for years, begging me to visit," Penelope explained. "When I lost my parents, she immediately invited me to come live with her. She's a widow with no children of her own." As the evening progressed, their conversation flowed easily, punctuated by moments of comfortable silence. Jackson found himself drawn to Penelope's intelligence and resilience, while she clearly appreciated his straightforward honesty and unwavering sense of justice. When they finally parted at her hotel room door, Jackson impulsively took her hand. "I'm glad I found you," he said simply. Penelope's green eyes searched his face. "So am I," she replied softly. "Good night, Jackson." Morning brought Judge Wilson's arrival, a stern-faced man, whose initial skepticism gave way to astonishment as the evidence against Alina Blackwell was presented. The judge interviewed Penelope personally, apologizing for her ordeal and commending Jackson for his perseverance in uncovering the truth. "Miss Blackwell will face trial in Santa Fe next month," Judge Wilson announced. "There are multiple jurisdictions seeking justice for her crimes. Miss Davis, you're free to continue your journey with the court's apologies." After the judge departed, Jackson found Penelope sitting on a bench outside the courthouse, her face tilted toward the sun. She looked different now. The fear and tension had melted away, revealing a quiet confidence that he found even more appealing. "Ready to head to San Francisco?" he asked, sitting beside her. She turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "Actually, I've been considering an alternative." "Oh." Jackson tried to mask his disappointment. "Judge Wilson mentioned there's a teaching position available in Sacramento," Penelope explained. "Given my father's background in education, I'm well qualified. It would give me purpose while still being close enough to visit my aunt regularly." "Sacramento's a fine city," Jackson nodded, wondering what this meant for any future between them. Penelope hesitated, then continued. "The judge also mentioned that the territorial governor has been seeking someone with your skills for a more official position. Apparently, your reputation precedes you." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "What kind of position?" "Special investigator for the territory," she replied. "Based in Sacramento as well." Understanding dawned on Jackson's face. "Did you have something to do with that suggestion?" A smile played at the corners of Penelope's lips. "I might have mentioned to the judge that your talents were being wasted on common bounty hunting." "And why would you do that?" he asked, moving slightly closer on the bench. "Perhaps I'm not ready to say goodbye to the man who saved my life," she admitted, a blush coloring her cheeks. "Or perhaps I simply believe you deserve recognition for your skills." Jackson took her hand gently. "Sacramento is quite a detour from San Francisco." "The best journeys often involve unexpected detours," Penelope replied softly. Their eyes met, and Jackson felt the same connection that had been growing since he first saw her being led into the jailhouse. Without overthinking, he leaned forward and kissed her gently at first, then with growing certainty as she responded. When they broke apart, Penelope's eyes were shining. "I believe Sacramento would suit us both quite well," she murmured. "Us," Jackson repeated, liking the sound of it. "I believe you're right, Miss Davis." 3 days later, they departed Fort Yuma together, heading northwest toward Sacramento and their new beginning. The stagecoach journey would take nearly 2 weeks, giving them ample time to learn more about each other outside the high-stakes circumstances of their meeting. Along the way, they stopped in small towns and settlements, sometimes staying an extra day when something caught their interest. In one mining town, they assisted the local sheriff in identifying a card cheat who had been fleecing miners of their earnings. In another, Penelope gave impromptu reading lessons to the children of a remote farming community, while Jackson helped track a mountain lion that had been preying on livestock. With each passing day, their bond deepened. Jackson found himself captivated by Penelope's quick mind and compassionate heart. while she discovered depths to him that went far beyond the skilled tracker and determined investigator she'd first met. By the time they reached Sacramento in early September 1874, what had begun as attraction had blossomed into love. The territorial governor was delighted to secure Jackson's services, especially after hearing of his role in capturing Alina Blackwell. Penelope was welcomed at the school, where her Eastern education and gentle manner quickly endeared her to both students and parents. They married that December in a simple ceremony attended by Penelope's aunt from San Francisco and a few new friends from Sacramento. Their honeymoon was a 2-week journey to San Francisco, where Penelope finally introduced Jackson to her aunt, who declared him exactly the sort of man I hoped you'd find, dear girl. Over the next 2 years, Jackson's reputation as a territorial investigator grew. He specialized in complex cases that crossed jurisdictional boundaries or involved mistaken identities and fraud areas, where his experience with Alina Blackwell proved invaluable. Penelope continued teaching, eventually becoming headmistress of the school. They purchased a modest home on the outskirts of Sacramento, with enough land for the few horses Jackson insisted on keeping. In the evenings, they would sit on their porch, watching the sunset and sharing stories of their days. In the spring of 1877, they received news that Alina Blackwell had been convicted of multiple crimes and sentenced to 20 years in a federal prison. The letter from Judge Wilson noted that testimonies from 3 other wrongfully accused women had been instrumental in securing the conviction. "Justice at last," Jackson remarked, folding the letter. "For everyone but the woman who died in Santa Fe," Penelope said softly, placing her hand over his. Jackson nodded solemnly. "My cousin finally has some peace, at least." "As do we all," Penelope agreed, then smiled and took his hand, placing it gently on her slightly rounded belly. "And soon we'll have even more joy to balance the scales." Jackson's eyes widened. "You're certain?" "The doctor confirmed it yesterday," she nodded, her eyes shining. "Our child should arrive before Christmas." Overwhelmed with emotion, Jackson gathered his wife into his arms. "I never imagined finding this kind of happiness," he confessed. "Not until I saw a copper-haired woman being dragged to jail for a crime she didn't commit." Penelope laughed, the sound still one of his favorite things in the world. "Not the most romantic beginning to a love story, but the perfect beginning to our love story," he corrected, kissing her tenderly. Their son, William, was born on a snowy December night in 1877, followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Elizabeth. As their family grew, so did their contentment with the life they'd built together. Jackson eventually accepted a permanent position with the U.S. Marshals, allowing him to remain based in Sacramento while still pursuing the work he excelled at. Penelope continued teaching until their 3rd child was born, then devoted herself to raising their family and writing educational materials that gained popularity throughout California schools. On the 5th anniversary of their first meeting, Jackson presented Penelope with a journal bound in soft leather. Inside, he'd written the story of how they met, beginning with her arrest and ending with their wedding. "So our children will know how their parents found each other," he explained. "And how justice sometimes works in unexpected ways." Penelope traced the cover with gentle fingers. "From a jail cell to this beautiful life," she mused. "I sometimes wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been tracking Alina Blackwell." "I would have found you anyway," Jackson said with absolute certainty. "Some people are meant to find each other, no matter what stands in their way. Even iron bars and false accusations," she teased. "Especially those," he affirmed, pulling her close. "Fate may have brought us together in the strangest of circumstances, but it was love that kept us there. As the years passed, their love story became something of a legend in Sacramento. The wrongfully accused schoolteacher and the determined investigator who had found justice and each other against the odds. Their children grew up hearing the tale, embellished over time but never losing the essential truth at its core. That sometimes the darkest moments led to the brightest futures, and that love could indeed conquer all obstacles, even iron bars and the shadow of the gallows. By the turn of the century, Jackson and Penelope Quinn had become respected elders in a Sacramento that was growing and changing with the times. Their oldest son had followed his father into law enforcement, their daughter had become a teacher like her mother, and their youngest son had established a successful horse ranch outside the city. When asked the secret to their long and happy marriage, Penelope would simply smile and say, "We began with truth and justice, then built everything else on that foundation." And Jackson, gray-haired but still straight-backed and clear-eyed, would add with a wink, "And I never forgot how lucky I was to find her before they threw away the key."